Hi friends, lesson 3. This is week 2. We're going to look at advertising and talk a little bit about media and British pop. It originates in the mid 1950s, and you'll see how Hamilton and Palazzi were two of the artists who were working that way. Hamilton, in a way, is the beginning of pop, but we'll explain why, even though Palazzi's pieces are earlier. Lawrence Alloway first uses the term pop in print, and he really conceives of pop as art, but at the lower end, in sort of the lowbrow versus highbrow art. And Hamilton kind of codifies what he feels pop is. Popular, designed for mass audience, transient, short-term solution, expendable, easily forgotten, low cost, mass produced, young. It's aimed at the youth, witty, sexy, gimmicky, glamorous, and big business. Some of this stuff could be applied to, our world today. So this is Paolozzi's kind of construction here. This is back from 1947. And we can see, this gun pop. We see this pinup girl image. We see serve Coca-Cola, intimate confessions. I was a rich man's plaything, ex-mistress, I confess. And it's this kind of popular culture, almost soap opera-y type of imagery coupled with like this kind of war propaganda as well as the Coca-Cola. It's an interesting combination, right? Here's one from 1952. And here you can see kind of the overt kind of sexualization. And I would say that here, the pinup over the kind of drawing of the penis and the testicles is very much like a male fantasy. The image of the male there is Charles Atlas. At the time, he was like the sort of the male, model, so to speak, of what a really strong man looked like. I think he was Mr. Universe or something like that. And he's holding up this car, right? Which is interesting. And it was very likely that Paolozzi kind of used bunk. He called these bunk pieces. And this idea of bunk may refer to Henry Ford, who said history is more or less bunk. And he was kind of speaking about the history of, war and the history of, great figures. And he really wanted to be part of the cutting edge, the new, and as an innovator, bringing the car to the automobile to the world. And here you see this funny thing is this man is stronger, right, than this car. He can lift up the car. And it's a really interesting conflation of like the individual and then the trappings of a consumer society. Anyway, really good to see this and to be considering this as we start talking about how the artists were looking at mass media, print media, probably radio, TV. If we go back earlier in the 1930s, Walter Benjamin, he has an essay, The Work in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. And I'm going to just take a note right now. I'm going to post that to our website, our Power Learning, in case you want to read it and go extra, right? It's an amazing piece. He basically said the aura of a work, because of mechanical reproduction, withers. It gets smaller. The aura, it doesn't have as much potency, right? For me, an ironic example of that could be the Mona Lisa, which seems to have this great aura in that, people talk about it, are moved by it. Now it's, it's being constantly selfied and photographed with phones rather than being perceived and really seen. Um, anyway, that's an aside. Previously, right, a work of art is located in a site with a specific location. If you wanted to see an image, you had to go to it, right? And there would be a community of those who knew about it deeply. And with mechanical reproduction, that image goes everywhere. What makes a work of art great now? It's possible the access to the image, right? It gets distributed so much that people find it to be analogous to their understanding of what art is. So one of the things that I kind of want us to always be going back and forth and thinking about what we've done, and the flatbed pieces, right, by Rauschenberg, with this goat, in a way it was like a synthesizing, right, of traditional art, this object, this tire, this mass-produced, and that synthesis, right, is like a particular cultural construct, right? Think about that. It's a cultural construct, and it has cues for us to read in. Here's an example of Peter Blake. He's a British artist, and he made these like little kind of scenes, which I think kind of may have influenced Wesselman, American artist. But you can see all this kind of, think of it as a synthesis of a cultural construct. And this might be vertical, whereas this is a flatbed. But the idea that the piece begins to become an amalgam of culture and material, right? That materiality and that materiality as signifier of a culture is kind of crucial, right? British artists, pop artists, were pretty divergent aesthetically. You could argue that they were more cohesive. They believed that culture shouldn't speak to the heights of artistic excellence, right? Rather, they saw themselves within the traditional social practices and amongst capitalism's cultural consumers. So, for example, they weren't, like Peter Blake here is a cultural consumer, and he's presenting it with a little bit of woodwork as well as the kind of cutouts from magazines, stamps, etc. And they felt that style, whatever style they wanted, and imagery could be appropriated from other sources and quoted at will. I think American artists were much more concerned with developing their own style. This is a piece, She, right, that you're going to be writing about. I don't want to say too much about it because I really want you to have a great time looking at it closely and really take your eye around the whole piece. There's not a heck of a lot there, but I'd like you to really analyze and describe it first. Really describe it, and then come up with possibilities. I would say you can think about this as taking place within the sort of sexual division of labor that was being kind of presented to us through advertising, right? The constructed gender norms, right? This is like the quintessential, perhaps, American housewife, and yet there's nothing exactly quintessential about it. He was aware of these images. These are all advertisements that have come from the 50s to the early 60s. And, I think we can talk about this during our synchronous session, and I want to just foreground it for you so that you can look at it and begin to think about it. I have many things to say about it, but I really want to begin our conversation synchronously with you talking about this. So I want to give you an opportunity to see these a little bit at first, because it might stimulate you thinking about particular ideas that you can bring to us right off the bat. As one interesting note is, part of the vilification of the tobacco industry is that they knew, right, that it was harmful. doctors were encouraged and often paid to prescribe. Doctors prescribed cigarettes to calm people down, right? Look at it. Enjoy your cigarette. Enjoy truly fine tobacco that combines both perfect mildness and rich taste. And, Lucky Strike could be, I think that could be read many different ways. And you guys will have a lot of thoughts, I guess. There's a Marilyn Monroe piece here. So what is it really? What's the culture representing, and what is this selling? Here's some other ones. I apologize for some of the pixelation. I just wanted them big enough that you really could get a sense of the whole thing. We'll look at these on Wednesday evening. All right, so Richard Hamilton, he attends Royal Academy Schools, and he completes it, most of the courses, but he's expelled for not profiting by the instruction given in painting school, because he kind of rejects the status quo of what schools, the tradition, the foundational painting programs that were in place. And he designed for EMI, which was a record label. And so he had experience with both high and low art. Philosophers Barth and Eco support his findings that Hamilton was talking about, that his designs, Carr for example, they convey status, power, and sexuality. The advertisers knew this, the philosophers spoke about it, and Hamilton was very well aware of this. Why do I throw this up there is because there's still this notion of a highbrow art, even though it's been rejected. This is David's Oath of the Herati from 1784. And in a way, like the outraged Impressionism, which, may have a limited scope in what it did in the history of modernism leading up to pop. This piece is a powerful one in that this was Monet's Impression Sunrise. This is kind of where Impressionism comes from as a name. And he really left this painting off, to some extent, unfinished in a traditional sense. It was more of a sketch. And the critics wanted to say, it's fine, it's a fine piece, just call it a sketch. And he wouldn't. He said, it's a painting. And so in this sense, there's always been a tension, and there always will be a tension between what's considered low and high. We'll talk more about that. And any questions you have about that, please write below in the discussion. Richard Hamilton, just what is it that makes today's home so different, so appealing? And again, it's being appropriating images from popular culture, from print ads, from advertisement. Charles Atlas again there, and he's got its Tootsie Pop, right? And one could argue that its placement has some significance for some of the messaging that he's giving. I wanted to bring up another British artist, David Hockney, insofar as I always like to foreground things we'll do in the future, but in terms of David Hockney's very open sexually, and you really didn't see, and one could argue that he was one of the first people, maybe except for Bazille, who I'll show you in a second, who kind of takes on the heteronormative tradition of depicting bathers, right? Because that was a traditional scene. Cézanne's bathers, you could have bathers. Seurat had bathers by the side of, the river, and you could have this in more of a classical sense. But you really didn't have the break that you see here. And specifically in this piece, where Hockney is very much like the other pop artists, in that he took this picture out of a gay magazine. I think it was Physique Pictorial. And he was, fascinated with it in London. And when he came to LA, there was a culture of pools and swimming and sunbathing, and he captured that. But he the origins come from his appropriation and painting of an image. He didn't use the actual image in a collage the way Hamilton does, but he appropriates and uses it, and it doesn't matter where it comes from. Here's the Basile piece that you could argue really challenges the heteronormative kind of bathing scene. So I think that's it for now. I really, I would like you to consider some of these things, like Hamilton's take on what pop art is. Right now, you're just being kind of exposed to this. Look at the wiki, and also, consider the sort of kitsch element, this lowbrow element that makes this up. And in the back of your head, think about how this, right, this, or even she, right, are similar and different than Monogram. Rauschenberg's not totally a pop artist, but a lot of the elements are going to inform what we do, especially with your looking at Oldenburg this week. All right. I will see you on Wednesday night. Have a great week. Thank you.